It's The Real News. I'm Ben Norton. We at The Real News here are joined by Ariel Gold. Ariel is the national co-director of CODEPINK, and she also leads the Palestine campaigns at CODEPINK. This is a women-led peace group that is one of the leading voices in the anti-war movement in the U.S. Thanks for joining us, Ariel.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, Ariel, I want to begin talking a bit about your personal activism. You've been arrested and detained multiple times in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. You protested at the Western Wall. You also have been arrested in Beilin in Palestine. Can you talk about what motivates you personally to put your body on the line?
Sure. So my family dates back to Zionism from the early 1900s. We established one of the early chapters of the Zionist Organization of America back around 1920-ish, far before Zionism was popular. And as I became aware of my personal history and what was happening there on the ground, I found myself feeling compelled to take action in any ways that I can, to make a change on the ground and express that the actions of the State of Israel do not represent my values as an American Jew. And so upon traveling there, I've carried out a number of actions, and some of them I was really surprised at the time by the response of the Israeli state, which professes to be the only democracy in the Middle East, and yet was extremely repressive around my rights to free speech.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. You've effectively been banned from Israel-Palestine, as have many critics of Israel, including many Jewish American critics. Chomsky and others. The Knesset passed a bill that bans anyone who supports the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. That's BDS. It's an international campaign to pressure the Israeli government to respect Palestinian human rights under international law and provide the right of return, etc. You've been banned personally. Can you respond to this ridiculous contradiction where Israel, which claims to represent Jews internationally, is banning its Jewish critics?
Well, Judaism as a culture and as a religion has a long history of deep thought, of critique, and of debate. And so the last time I was there, the right wing in Israel, the right wing settlers living illegally on Palestinian land, launched a campaign to say that I didn't belong in the country because I'm outspoken against the policies of the State of Israel. And at the time, they said they were investigating my case and that I wouldn't be allowed back into the state because of my dissent. And all of this occurred within myself being physically assaulted by one of these settlers and having to take out a restraining order. And I find it really shocking in comparison to what I grew up with as Jewish values. And I'm certainly not the only one for which there's this contradiction. I think the world watched as Natalie Portman spoke out in really what was a minor way against the massacre of Palestinian civilians. And in response to that, Israeli politicians threatened to take away her citizenship, which is an absurd concept to begin with. I'm continuing to fight with the state about my right to enter, and it's just horrible how this country continues to promote themselves as democratic while clamping down more and more on dissent.
Yeah, you raised Natalie Portman. This is a great example. This is the Hollywood actress, award-winning actress, who is herself Israeli-American and has previously in the past been outspoken in support of Israel, but in response to the massacres of unarmed protesters in the Gaza Strip, which has been illegally besieged by Israel for the past decade. In response to this, she decided not to go to an award ceremony, and as you mentioned, a senior member of Likud, the ruling right-wing party in Israel, threatened to strip her of her citizenship. And to me, this is incredible because Israel, the whole point of Zionism is that Israel says that all Jews around the world have the right to come to this country and be members of this society. But now, actually, what Israeli politicians are showing is that they don't actually mean that. Palestinians don't have the right to return to the homes from which they were ethnically cleansed and expelled in '48. And also, Jews who criticize our policies also don't have a right to come to this country. So I'm wondering if you can just talk about this contradiction of Israel claiming to speak on behalf of international Jewry and banning critics, and also how it pertains to the BDS movement and the attempt to crack down on Jews and everyone else who support BDS.
So BDS, for me, is one of the most common sense, nonviolent tactics that we could take. You know, it really just says that we are trying to pressure Israel to abide by international law and universal standards for human rights. And for decades, the international community and Israel itself has been saying, why don't we have, why don't Palestinians themselves and Palestinian advocates have a nonviolent tool to use to advocate for what their requests are? And BDS is absolutely that. And there's nothing that is more threatening, though, to the state of Israel than nonviolent advocacy. And that's what we're watching right now in Gaza, people marching to the border unarmed. And BDS, again, is also this nonviolent tool. And Israel knows how to respond to violence. They know how to respond to rockets, to knife attacks. It's really easy to create a narrative around that. But nonviolence is something they don't know how to respond to. And so instead, they have created their own propaganda that BDS advocates are terrorists and trying to destroy Jewish people across the world. It's absolutely untrue. But within that, they've managed to create a ban. And there's a ban myself, I'm banned. And there's also a ban on 20 organizations worldwide, of which CODEPINK is one of them. And then there's also legislation across the US outlawing BDS. And that in the US is a direct infringement on our First Amendment.
Yeah, and you're involved in other groups that have been blacklisted by the Israeli government. You're an organizer with Jewish Voice for Peace and also If Not Now. What's interesting is, while politicians are still clinging on to this very extreme right-wing view of the Israel-Palestine conflict, in which you can't even acknowledge Palestinian human rights in any way, or you're smeared and silenced, while that's happening at the same time, at the grassroots level, there has been a massive upswell, particularly in the Jewish American community, where you have groups like JVP, which is one of the fastest growing Jewish American groups, that are supporting BDS and are supporting activism on behalf of Palestinian human rights. Can you talk about the shift going on at the grassroots and organizations like JVP and If Not Now?
Well, Jewish Americans are waking up to the reality that we have been taught that Israel was created as a land without people for a people with no land. And frankly, that was an outright lie. Jewish Americans, and I'm a Jewish mother myself, I'm a mother to 2 children. Jewish community raises our children to think that Palestinians didn't exist in the first place and never to speak about the occupation. And what happens is, as we grow up and we learn what's happening, we learn that Palestinians are being killed on the ground, that between 500 and 700 Palestinian children are arrested and detained and physically abused each year. We become very disillusioned with the state of Israel. And so there's this growing rift between American or diaspora Jews and Israeli Jews. And it's becoming a more and more alienating relationship. And it's something that Israel is, and frankly should be, concerned about. It's really shining a light on the lie that Israel speaks for Jews worldwide.
Yeah, and then finally, just concluding here, as an organizer involved with CODEPINK, JVP, If Not Now, and other groups, what gives you hope? I mean, it's easy to be despairing at this moment. It seems like the Israeli government is actually stronger than ever. The attacks on BDS are growing, while BDS is itself growing. There is a shift in some, small corners of U.S. politics, but it's pretty daunting. What gives you hope?
It is pretty daunting right now. I would have to say, though, that I have a lot of hope. And what gives me hope right now is young people. Whether it's the 21-year-old medic who was killed yesterday in Gaza, or it's young Jews across America taking to the streets and risking arrest. Young people are saying, these are not my politics. This is not my Judaism. I won't support this occupation. I won't live under this crippling siege. And I'm going to bring my community with me for the change that we need to have happen.
Well, thank you for joining us here at The Real News. We were joined by Ariel Gold. Ariel is an organizer with CODEPINK. She's in fact the national co-director and leads their Palestine campaign. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Reporting for The Real News, I'm Ben Norton.